There is a moment in every life when everything feels heavier than usual. When problems don't knock, they enter. When silence feels loud. When your mind refuses to rest and your heart feels like it is carrying a weight no one can see. And in those moments, most people believe happiness is gone. But here is the truth most people never learn. Training your mind to respond instead of reacting in difficult situations is one of the highest forms of emotional intelligence and inner strength a person can develop. In life, challenges do not wait for us to be ready. They arrive suddenly, often in moments when we feel least prepared. A harsh word, a sudden failure, a betrayal, a financial setback, or an unexpected change can instantly disturb our inner balance. In those moments, the natural tendency of the mind is to react immediately. Reaction is fast, emotional, and often uncontrolled. It is driven by fear, anger, frustration, or sadness. When you react, you are not choosing your behavior consciously. You are being controlled by the emotional surge of the moment. But when you train your mind to respond instead of react, you create space between the event and your action. That space is powerful. It allows you to pause even for a few seconds and observe what is happening inside you. Instead of being consumed by the emotion, you begin to notice it. You see the anger rising, the frustration building, or the anxiety increasing, but you do not immediately act on it. This pause is where transformation begins. In that pause, you regain control over your mind, instead of letting your mind control you. Response is different from reaction because it is thoughtful. It is grounded in awareness rather than impulse. When you respond, you are asking yourself a deeper question. What is the best way to handle this situation in a way that protects my peace and dignity? This question shifts your focus from emotional chaos to mental clarity. It allows logic, patience, and wisdom to enter the situation. A person who responds instead of reacting may still feel the emotion, but they are not ruled by it. They acknowledge it, understand it, and then choose their action carefully. Training this ability does not happen overnight. It requires repetition and conscious practice. At first, the mind will resist. In moments of stress, you may still react before you realize it. But over time, as you become more aware, you start noticing patterns in your behavior. You begin to recognize the early signs of emotional escalation. Maybe your heartbeat increases, maybe your thoughts become rapid, maybe your tone starts to rise. These signals become your warning system. Instead of continuing down the path of reaction, you learn to pause and reset. This process also involves self-control and self-awareness. Self-control is the ability to hold back impulsive actions. Self-awareness is the ability to understand what you are feeling and why you are feeling it. When these two qualities work together, you develop emotional mastery. You stop becoming a victim of circumstances and start becoming a conscious participant in your own life. Even in situations where you cannot control what happens, you can always control how you respond. There is also a deep psychological benefit to this practice. When you react impulsively, you often create regret. You say things you do not mean, you damage relationships, or you worsen situations. But when you respond calmly, you reduce unnecessary conflict. You preserve relationships, protect your reputation, and maintain inner peace. This does not mean you suppress your emotions. It means you channel them wisely instead of letting them explode uncontrollably. Over time, this training reshapes your entire personality. You become calmer in conversations, more stable in pressure, and more thoughtful in decisions. People begin to notice your composure. Situations that once disturbed you deeply no longer have the same power. You are no longer easily shaken by external events because your internal world has become stronger and more stable. Happiness is often misunderstood as something that depends on external conditions. But in reality, it is a mental discipline that must be developed and maintained regardless of circumstances. Many people believe they will become happy when life becomes easier, when problems disappear, when they achieve success, or when they find the right people around them. This belief keeps happiness in the future, always just out of reach. As a result, the mind remains trapped in waiting, hoping that one day everything outside will align perfectly so that inner peace can finally appear. But true understanding reveals something different. Happiness is not a destination that arrives when life becomes perfect. It is a skill that is built within the mind through consistent practice, awareness, and control. Just like physical discipline strengthens the body, mental discipline strengthens emotional stability. When happiness is treated as a discipline, it becomes less dependent on circumstances and more rooted in conscious choice. This means a person can experience stress, pain, or difficulty, yet still maintain a stable inner state. The mind naturally drifts toward negativity if it is not guided. It focuses on problems more easily than solutions, on losses more than gains, and on fear more than hope. This is why happiness cannot be left to chance. It requires training. Mental discipline means deliberately choosing thoughts that support peace, rather than thoughts that destroy it. It means learning to step back from emotional noise and observe life with clarity instead of confusion. When this discipline is practiced consistently, the mind begins to change its default patterns. Instead of automatically reacting with worry, it starts to search for understanding. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by challenges, it starts to process them calmly. This shift does not mean ignoring reality or pretending everything is fine. It means facing reality with strength rather than weakness. A disciplined mind does not deny pain, but it also does not allow pain to dominate its entire inner world. It creates balance between what is happening outside and what is maintained inside. This form of happiness is powerful because it is not easily broken. External happiness is fragile. It depends on people, situations, and outcomes, all of which are constantly changing. When those things change, happiness disappears. But internal happiness, built through discipline, remains stable even when external conditions shift. It becomes a foundation rather than a reaction. It is not shaken easily because it is not built on unstable ground. Training happiness also involves controlling attention. Whatever the mind focuses on becomes stronger. If attention is constantly directed toward problems, the mind grows heavier and more stressed. If attention is guided toward gratitude, growth, and possibility, the mind becomes lighter and more peaceful. Mental discipline is therefore the ability to direct attention intentionally, rather than letting it wander without control. This requires effort, especially in difficult times, because the mind naturally gravitates toward negativity when under pressure. However, with consistent practice, this discipline becomes natural. A person begins to notice that they are not as easily disturbed as before. Small issues no longer create overwhelming emotional reactions. There is more patience in difficult conversations, more clarity in stressful moments, and more stability during uncertainty. This does not mean life becomes easier, but the way life is experienced becomes different. The same situation that once created chaos in the mind now becomes manageable. Happiness as a discipline also involves emotional responsibility. Instead of blaming circumstances for inner disturbance, a disciplined mind takes ownership of its emotional state. It understands that while it cannot always control events, it can always influence interpretation. This shift in responsibility is powerful because it returns control to the individual. It removes the mindset of helplessness and replaces it with awareness and strength. Over time, this disciplined approach creates a deeper form of happiness that is not dependent on constant excitement or pleasure. It is a quiet stability that remains present even in silence, even in difficulty, even in uncertainty. It is not loud or temporary, but steady and grounded, shaping the way a person experiences every moment of life. Gratitude is one of the most powerful mental tools for reducing the intensity of negative thoughts, yet it is often overlooked because the human mind is naturally drawn toward what is missing rather than what is present. In difficult times, the mind becomes even more focused on problems, failures, and losses. It creates a narrow perception where everything seems overwhelming and nothing feels sufficient. In this state, negative thoughts grow stronger because they are constantly being fed with attention and emotional energy. Gratitude interrupts this cycle by shifting attention away from what is wrong and redirecting it toward what still exists, what is still working, and what is still valuable. When a person is trapped in negativity, their mental world becomes smaller and heavier. Every situation appears worse than it actually is, because the mind keeps repeating the same thoughts without interruption. Gratitude does not deny the existence of problems, but it expands awareness beyond them. It allows the mind to see a broader picture, instead of focusing on a single painful point. Even in the middle of hardship, there are always elements that remain stable, such as health, breath, relationships, memories, lessons, or even small moments of peace. When attention is directed toward these elements, the emotional weight begins to reduce. The practice of gratitude is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about training the mind to recognize balance. A situation can be difficult and still contain something meaningful. A person can be struggling and still have reasons to appreciate life. When gratitude becomes a habit, the mind stops exaggerating negativity. It begins to develop a more realistic and grounded perception of reality. This shift is essential because negativity thrives on distortion, while gratitude restores clarity. Negative thoughts gain power when they are repeated without interruption. The mind tends to replay painful memories, imagine worst-case scenarios, and focus on what could go wrong. This repetition creates emotional intensity, making problems feel larger than they are. Gratitude works as a mental interruption. When a person consciously focuses on something they are thankful for, even for a few seconds, the cycle of negativity is broken. This does not eliminate problems, but it reduces their emotional dominance. Over time, consistent gratitude practice rewires the way the brain responds to situations. Instead of immediately reacting with stress or worry, the mind begins to search for something positive, even in challenging circumstances. This does not happen instantly, but gradually the mind becomes more balanced. It learns that every situation contains multiple layers, not just the negative ones. This deeper awareness creates emotional resilience, which is the ability to remain stable under pressure. Gratitude also changes the internal dialogue of a person. Instead of constantly saying, "I don't have enough," or "this is not working," the mind starts to recognize, "I still have this," or "this is still valuable." This shift in language may seem small, but it has a profound impact on emotional state. Words shape perception, and perception shapes feelings. When the inner dialogue becomes more appreciative, emotional distress naturally decreases. Even in moments of intense difficulty, Gratitude can be practiced in simple ways. It can begin with awareness of basic things that are often taken for granted. Breathing without effort, the ability to think, the presence of small comforts, or even the strength to continue another day. These small acknowledgements gradually shift attention away from despair and towards stability. The mind starts to realize that even in hardship, life is not entirely empty or broken. With time, gratitude becomes more than a practice. It becomes a mindset. The mind no longer waits for perfect conditions to feel calm or content. Instead, it finds reasons to remain steady even when conditions are imperfect. This does not remove challenges, but it reduces their emotional control. Negative thoughts lose their dominance because they are no longer the only focus of attention. A more balanced inner world begins to form where difficulties exist but do not define the entire experience of life. Not every thought that enters your mind deserves your belief, your attention, or your emotional response, especially during stressful or painful moments. The mind is constantly generating thoughts, many of which are influenced by fear, memory, insecurity, and past experiences rather than reality itself. In difficult situations, these thoughts often become louder, more intense, and more negative. They create stories of worst-case scenarios, self-doubt, and emotional pain that may feel real in the moment, but are not always true. Learning not to believe every thought your mind produces is a powerful form of mental freedom. The human mind is not always a truthful narrator. It is more like a storyteller that reacts to emotions and circumstances. When you are stressed, it tells stressful stories. When you are afraid, it creates fearful predictions. When you are hurt, it repeats painful memories. These thoughts appear automatically, without permission, and often without logic. If a person believes every thought as absolute truth, they become trapped in a cycle of unnecessary suffering. They begin to confuse thoughts with reality, even though thoughts are only mental events passing through awareness. During emotional pressure, the mind tends to exaggerate situations. A small mistake can feel like a complete failure. A delay can feel like permanent loss. A misunderstanding can feel like rejection. These interpretations are not facts. They are mental reactions shaped by emotion. When a person is unaware of this process, they respond to these thoughts as if they are reality, which increases stress and confusion. But when awareness develops, a separation begins to form between the thinker and the thoughts. This separation is the beginning of mental strength. Instead of being fully absorbed by every thought, a person starts observing them. Thoughts come and go, but they are no longer automatically accepted. There is a moment of pause where questioning becomes possible. Is this thought true, or is it just fear speaking? Is this assumption based on facts, or is it based on emotion? This questioning creates space between thought and reaction, and in that space, clarity becomes available. Not believing every thought does not mean ignoring the mind. It means understanding its nature. The mind is designed to process information, but it is not always designed to be accurate in emotional situations. It often mixes imagination with reality. For example, it may predict rejection before it happens, or assume failure before any real outcome is known. If these thoughts are believed without examination, they can influence behavior and create unnecessary limitations. When a person learns to observe thoughts instead of immediately accepting them, emotional stability begins to grow. They realize that thoughts are temporary, not permanent truths. A negative thought does not define identity. A fearful thought does not predict the future. A self-critical thought does not reflect absolute reality. It is simply a mental pattern that appears and disappears. This understanding reduces the power of negativity because it is no longer unquestioned authority. Over time, this awareness changes the relationship between a person and their mind. Instead of being controlled by every thought, they begin to choose which thoughts deserve attention. Helpful thoughts are allowed to grow, while harmful or the distorted thoughts are not given unnecessary energy. This selective attention is what creates mental discipline. It allows a person to remain grounded even when the mind becomes chaotic. In moments of stress, this practice becomes especially important. Without it, the mind can spiral into overthinking, anxiety, and emotional overload. With it, there is a sense of distance and calm observation. Thoughts may still arise, but they do not dictate behavior or emotional state as strongly as before. The person remains more centered. Even in uncertainty, this ability develops gradually. At first, it requires conscious effort to notice and question thoughts. Over time, it becomes more natural. The mind still produces noise, but the inner awareness becomes stronger than the noise itself. Emotional reactions become less automatic, and clarity becomes more accessible even in difficult circumstances. True strength is not revealed in comfort or ease, but in the ability to remain calm when life becomes uncertain, painful, or overwhelming. Every person faces storms in life, moments where plans collapse, expectations break, and emotions become heavy. In those moments, it is easy to lose control internally, to feel disturbed, anxious, or emotionally unstable. But staying calm inside life's storms is what separates emotional reaction from inner strength. It is the ability to stand in difficulty without allowing it to destroy inner peace. Calmness is often misunderstood as weakness or indifference, but in reality, it is a deeply powerful state of awareness and control. A calm mind does not mean the absence of problems. It means the presence of stability despite problems. When everything outside feels chaotic, a calm person maintains an inner anchor that keeps them grounded. This anchor is not based on external conditions, but on internal discipline and understanding. Life storms can come in many forms. It can be emotional conflict, financial pressure, relationship struggles, personal failure, or unexpected changes. Each storm carries emotional intensity that can easily disturb the mind if there is no inner stability. The natural response of the mind is to react with fear, frustration, or panic. But reaction often increases the intensity of the problem instead of reducing it. Calmness, on the other hand, creates space for better thinking and wiser decisions. When a person remains calm, their thinking becomes clearer. Emotional noise begins to reduce, allowing logic and awareness to surface. This clarity is essential because most mistakes during difficult times are not caused by the situation itself, but by emotional reactions to the situation. Panic leads to poor decisions, while calmness allows better evaluation of reality. Even in the middle of chaos, a calm mind can identify what can be controlled and what must be accepted. Staying calm also protects emotional energy. When the mind is constantly reacting, it becomes exhausted. Stress builds up, thoughts become scattered, and emotional stability weakens. But calmness conserves energy. It prevents unnecessary emotional exhaustion and allows a person to remain strong for longer periods. This inner preservation is what helps people endure long and difficult phases of life without breaking internally. Calmness is not something that appears naturally in every situation. It is developed through practice and awareness. It requires learning to pause before reacting, to breathe before speaking, and to observe before judging. In difficult moments, the mind wants immediate response, but calmness teaches patience. That small pause between stimulus and reaction becomes the foundation of emotional control. In storms, the mind often creates exaggerated fears. It predicts worst outcomes, assumes failure, and magnifies problems. A calm mind does not accept these predictions immediately. It steps back and observes them as possibilities rather than facts. This shift in perception reduces emotional intensity. Instead of being consumed by imagined outcomes, the mind focuses on present reality and practical steps. Staying calm does not mean ignoring emotions. It means understanding them without being controlled by them. Fear can exist, but it does not need to dictate behavior. Stress can arise, but it does not need to define decisions. Calmness allows emotions to be present without becoming dominant. This balance creates emotional maturity and inner resilience. Over time, practicing calmness changes how a person experiences life. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. Challenges that once created panic begin to feel like problems that can be solved step by step. The mind develops trust in its own ability to handle difficulty. This trust reduces fear and increases stability. Even in the most intense situations, a calm mind maintains a sense of direction. It does not rush blindly into decisions, nor does it collapse under pressure. It observes, processes, and responds with awareness. This steady approach not only improves outcomes, but also preserves inner peace, even when external circumstances remain unchanged. True happiness is often misunderstood as something that comes from comfort, success, or favorable circumstances. But in reality, it is not dependent on the outside world. External comfort can bring temporary pleasure, but it cannot guarantee lasting peace. Situations change, people change, and life is unpredictable. If happiness depends only on external conditions, then it becomes fragile and unstable, rising and falling with every change in life. Real happiness is something deeper. It is inner stability, the ability to remain steady within yourself, even when life outside is uncertain. Inner stability means that your emotional state is not easily shaken by external events. It does not mean that a person never feels pain, sadness, or stress. It means that these emotions do not completely take over the inner world. A person with inner stability can experience difficulty, but still maintain a sense of balance. They can face challenges without losing their center. This creates a quiet strength that is not visible on the surface, but is deeply felt within. External comfort is temporary by nature. A successful moment can be followed by failure. A peaceful situation can be followed by conflict. A comfortable phase can suddenly change without warning. When happiness is tied to these changing conditions, it becomes unstable. The mind keeps waiting for the next good moment to feel happy again. This creates dependency on circumstances, and dependency always leads to disappointment sooner or later. The source stability, however, does not depend on conditions. It is built through understanding, awareness, and mental discipline. A person learns to observe life without being completely controlled by it. Instead of being fully absorbed in every situation, they develop the ability to step back mentally and see things with clarity. This distance creates space for calmness, even in difficult times. When a person is internally stable, their happiness is not easily disturbed by external noise. Criticism does not break them easily. Failure does not define them completely. Unexpected changes do not destroy their sense of self. They understand that every situation is temporary, and no single moment defines their entire existence. This understanding creates emotional resilience, which is the foundation of true happiness. Inner stability also comes from self-awareness. When a person understands their thoughts, emotions, and reactions, they are less likely to be controlled by them. Instead of reacting impulsively to every situation, they begin to respond with awareness. This shift creates emotional balance. The mind becomes less chaotic and more centered. Even during pressure, there is a sense of control and clarity. Another important aspect of inner stability is detachment from constant validation. When happiness depends on approval from others, it becomes unstable. Opinions of people change frequently, and relying on them creates emotional insecurity. Inner stability allows a person to find value within themselves, rather than depending entirely on external recognition. This internal validation creates a stronger sense of peace. As inner stability grows, the experience of happiness also changes. It becomes quieter, deeper, and more consistent. It is no longer dependent on excitement or constant stimulation. Instead, it exists as a background state of being. Even in ordinary moments, there is a sense of calm contentment. Even in difficult moments, there is an underlying stability that remains unshaken. This type of happiness does not eliminate problems, but it changes how problems are experienced. Challenges are still present, but they do not define the entire emotional state. There is room for clarity even in confusion, patience even in frustration, and strength even in weakness. The mind becomes less reactive and more grounded, allowing life to be experienced with greater balance. Over time, inner stability becomes a natural way of living. The person no longer chases happiness outside themselves. Instead, they carry it within them as a steady presence. Life continues to change, but the inner world remains more consistent. This consistency is what creates true happiness, not as a temporary emotion, but as a stable way of being that exists regardless of external conditions. In the end, the real message is simple but deeply powerful. Life will always bring challenges, uncertainty, and moments of emotional pressure, but your inner world does not have to collapse because of them. You are not defined by what happens to you, but by how you train your mind to respond, interpret, and grow through it. True transformation begins when you realize that happiness is not something life gives you, but something you build within yourself. It is shaped by discipline, strengthened by awareness, and protected by inner stability. When you stop believing every thought, when you learn to stay calm in emotional storms, when you choose gratitude over negativity, and when you train yourself to respond instead of react, your entire experience of life begins to shift. External circumstances will always change, but the trained mind remains steady. This steadiness becomes your real strength. It allows you to move through pain without losing yourself, to face uncertainty without fear, and to experience life with clarity, even in chaos. At that point, happiness is no longer dependent on perfection. It becomes a quiet strength that stays with you, not because life is easy, but because your mind has learned how to remain strong within it.